The TA will no longer be a general reserve for general war in Europe, but a wholly integrated and vital part of a single capability, both valuable and valued by the whole country.
In other words, the Territorial Army has a new mission for a new millennium. Although large-scale operations such as the Gulf War and more recent conflicts such as Kosovo will always be a possibility in this uncertain world, political and strategic changes worldwide have changed the demands placed on the regular British Army. Increasingly, operations other than war have also led to new roles, such as international peacekeepers and humanitarian aid providers, often under the NATO or UN umbrellas. These political and strategic changes have changed the role of the reserve forces too. From the more traditional role of home defence, the Territorial Army has now taken on a more central task in support of military deployments. Capabilities such as communications, logistics, artillery, air defence, and especially medical services are provided by the reserves in support of our regular contingency forces and in all types of operational situations around the globe. They've become more relevant to current political and strategic requirements and are ready to meet these changed operational demands, more usable in support of our national interests and foreign policy aims, and more integrated with the operational structure of the regular army. In other words, they become an essential part of the regular army's wide spectrum of capabilities, whichever category of the Territorial Army they may join. Structurally, the TA is divided into two distinct groups. One is the independent TA, and the other is the specialist TA. Whilst the independents are volunteers who join and train on a unit basis at their local TA centres and elsewhere, the specialists are recruited for their civilian skills and train at central locations and with a lower training commitment. The 1996 Reserve Forces Act has provided volunteers with new categories of service. For example, high readiness reserves, who are individuals with specific skills and who volunteer to be placed at a high state of readiness. The sponsored reserves are made up of civilians whose work experience as MOD contractors, for instance, would enable them to readily transfer their expertise to mobilised operations. And of course, there's the full-time reserve service, or FTRS. This service allows the volunteer to move in and out of the regular army during the course of his or her duty, but without losing reserve status. Let's look at this structure diagrammatically and examine how we make best use of our reserves to meet a spectrum of requirements. During peacetime and ongoing operations such as Bosnia or minor humanitarian operations, the reserves support the regular army through routine voluntary mobilisation, helping to support training, meeting undermanning, or supporting current operations, either on full-time reserve service for longer attachments worldwide, or providing support in the UK on a part-time basis through additional duty commitments. This routine reinforcement of the regular army by TA individuals is controlled by HQ Land Command through the Army Personnel Centre in Glasgow. In the event of the international situation worsening, a need may arise to deploy a full warfighting brigade at the same time as the deployment of a similar force committed to a peacekeeping operation. To meet such an expansion in our forces, voluntary mobilisation, full-time reserve service and additional duty commitments will continue to be used, albeit more extensively. The Secretary of State may also have to compulsorily mobilise certain specialists, including high readiness reserves, as well as form TA medical units to support such a medium scale of operation. All individual reservists of whatever type will be mobilised and demobilised through the Reserves Training and Mobilisation Centre at Chilwell. If the situation worsens still further and there's a requirement to deploy a warfighting division or a larger force to meet our international obligations, such as in support of a multinational operation under a UN mandate or a NATO-led operation, in particular our support for the ACE Rapid Reaction Corps, then reliance on Territorial Army formed units will increase considerably. At this stage, compulsory mobilisation will become the norm as we regenerate our forces to meet a full NATO regional conflict, by which time virtually the whole of the Territorial Army would be involved. So how then is the modern territorial army meeting the demands made upon it? Although essentially the shift in emphasis has been away from the combat arms, the infantry and the yeomanry will continue to provide reinforcements to the regular army. The infantry will undertake specific home defence tasks, as well as providing a general reserve through the regional volunteer battalions. Here at the Infantry Training Centre in Wales, we see TA infantry soldiers going through weapons training courses and the rigours of the TA Platoon Sergeant's Battle Course. This tough 2 weeks of day and night training exercises covers the full range of infantry operations and teaches the tactics and skills necessary to control and administer a platoon of 30 men on operations.
What some people tend to forget, and including regular soldiers, is that the TA, when we're training them, they're being trained on the same syllabus and objectives as regular soldiers.
Why'd you take it on your own? Because he had no ammo left, colour.
We don't change any form of routine or aspect of training purely because they're TA. You know, they do exactly the same sort of training, and we expect the same high standards, and in which many of them, I would say at least 99%, come up with the same standards.
The volunteers' enthusiasm has certainly gone a long way to making up for their lack of training time and facilities, but their commitment, combined with further training and access to regular army modern facilities, will allow them to reach standards on a par with their regular counterparts. At the Royal Armoured Corps training facilities here at Bovington, one of 3 new yeomanry regiments is receiving instruction on sophisticated simulators and high-tech computer-based training for the Challenger 2 main battle tank. Their training here will enable the TA to provide fully trained tank crewmen to the Royal Armoured Corps, as well as an armoured delivery capability. Another regiment is trained in medium reconnaissance skills and is fully equipped with CVRTs, whilst 2 yeomanry squadrons continue to train in the nuclear, biological and chemical role as part of the new Joint Army RAF NBC Defence Unit. The TA's combat support forces, who provide fire support and operational assistance to the combat forces, also include the Royal Artillery, who provide units trained on Javelin close air defence systems and the battle-winning multi-launch rocket system, MLRS, so successfully deployed in the Gulf. Additionally, it provides individual reservists trained on the AS-90 and light gun, as well as the Rapier and high-velocity missile air defence systems. But their contribution to combat support also includes capabilities that are in short supply in the regular army. The Royal Engineers, for instance, provide plant operators, railway engineers and airfield damage repair. And the TA Royal Signals provide national and regional communications, as well as giving significant support to the strategic trunk communications for NATO's ACE Rapid Reaction Corps and to the HQ of the Joint Rapid Deployment Force. But it's in the areas of combat service support, the forces which provide the combat forces with administrative and logistic support, that the Territorial Army's role has become particularly important. The regular army's ability to sustain the current level of operations relies on the deployment of individual reservists, and to mount further operations may well require the deployment of formed combat service support units, particularly in the Army Medical Services. TA's support of medical units in the form of nurses, surgeons, dentists and other medical experts may well be needed for a brigade-sized operation.
I went out to Bosnia last year for about a month and a half. I volunteered to go out, and the reasons for going out are several. One, I belong to a TA unit, and I feel that the reserve forces exist primarily to support the regular forces. And we know that the medical corps has been short there for some time, and a vacancy arose, and I put myself forward for that deployment. Secondly, I think if the TA has to have credibility, then it has to work in real time along with the big army, the one army concept. Another reason why I went there was that I am an instructor with a team which trains the troops in battlefield advanced trauma life support. Quite a mouthful. Advanced battlefield resuscitation. And every medic who's deployed in Bosnia, be it a doctor, a dentist, a nurse, or a combat med technician, has to go through this period of training prior to deployment.
Other fundamental combat service support requirements necessary to mount and sustain operations are provided by the Royal Logistic Corps' wide range of skills, and where the TA specialist civilian skills are especially useful. Not only do the reservists' contribution of skills and manpower enable our regular army to maintain Britain's commitment to NATO, but they're an integral part of our armed forces. As such, they have to train alongside the regulars, both as individuals and formed units, and take part in a variety of overseas exercises. Traditionally, the TA's role has been that of a trained reserve, who have provided the basis for the expansion and regeneration of the army, and this role remains as important as ever. However, its primary role is one of support in operations of all kinds and across the whole spectrum of capabilities. The 1996 Reserve Forces Act provides the flexibility for the territorials to give that support to the regulars, not only in war-fighting operations, but in peacekeeping, humanitarian aid operations, and smaller conflicts too. Today's territorial army is more relevant and usable.
In today's operational climate, it would be very, very hard to cope without the support from the TA.
But the reserves also provide wider capabilities, and it's the combination of their military and civilian skills that makes them adept at making their own contribution to the defence diplomacy mission to overseas democratic countries.
And if you look to your rear right,
here in Lithuania, for instance, a six-man team regularly help to train the Lithuanian Reserve Army. Of course, even in peacetime, the pressure on our regular army is considerable. Civilian communities at home and overseas affected by conflict or natural disasters depend heavily on the support of our armed forces. And these diverse operations too are sustained by the territorial army. These may be communities who are in urgent need of different kinds of medical aid.
Earlier this year I was in Sri Lanka, for example, again with a specialist training team, assisting them in humanitarian type medical education.
Or the expertise of the sappers to help restore vital services.
My role in the Royal Engineers, should it be a disaster relief, would be to operate the plant equipment, to clear up debris. We also have carpenters and joiners, bricklayers, painters, decorators, electricians, basically any of the artisan trades that you can think of that the Royal Engineers have got. So as far as disasters would go, we would be there to rebuild the roads, get the lighting back online, we do a lot of water purification, so getting sanitised water, plumbing, just to keep the diseases down basically, and bring the country back to life.
It was as a result of these urgent and all too frequent needs for humanitarian aid operations that the Civil Affairs Group was formed. This growing and highly relevant group provides structured teams of individuals and specialists to affected communities abroad. Expert teams who can provide help with post-conflict or natural disaster damage reconstruction, re-establishing local governments through to general humanitarian aid. At home, the TA, with its broad geographical spread, provide much-needed assistance to local communities in times of emergencies. In fact, the TA is often the only army presence in any given local area, and as such, they form the vitally important link between our armed forces and the civilian community.
And we managed to get 800 sleeping bags through as well, so we could get them
slept properly last night. Like,
since the Second World War, as the need for the armed forces has become smaller, society's involvement with it is much less. So they are the visible ambassadors of the armed forces locally, where future recruitment is going to come from. And it is the image, what most little boys and girls have of the army. And I think occasions like open days, or inviting youngsters in, or taking the cadets along on exercise, helps to instill that understanding in society at large.
But there's also another important role that the Territorial Army fulfills. Its countrywide TA centres provide the very important framework for further expansion and reconstitution of our army in the event of a major or protracted war. There can be no doubt that we need and value the commitment thousands of individuals are prepared to make in support of our national and international interests. With the regular Army's dependency on the reserves to complete their orbat in times of emergency and rising tension, there may come a need for compulsory mobilisation of the reservists, and current legislation which underpins the employees' safeguards allows for this.
In my way of thinking, the reserve forces exist because there is the possibility of call-out, because that surely should be their function, no more and no less. And most people who wear uniform and train in the Territorial Army must feel very proud if that opportunity came their way, at a personal level, at a unit level, at a regimental level.
There's always a chance with staff that's in the Territorial Army that they're going to get called off, not just for the routine exercises, but for some national crisis or international crisis. I think it's about a matter of balance. The numbers actually involved are relatively small in terms of the 1,200 people that are working on the site. I think it's probably half a dozen or so staff. And we can plan in the way we run our service to release those people at fairly short notice. And for me, the benefits that they get as individuals and also the skills they bring back to the organisation are well worth the occasions that they have to go off at short notice. I was invited to send 2 people on operational stretch this year. It was an operation run by the London Territorial Army down in Guildford, and it gave a chance for 2 staff, and we picked 2 nurses to go and spend a weekend working in teams with managers from right across the region to do things with the army that they would probably never have an opportunity to do. I had a surgeon who worked here who had been a member of the Territorial Army who I think brought his experiences from the battlefield, which he'd also had during his time with the TA, back into use in the hospital. We had a power failure while he was operating on a patient in theatres. And whilst everybody else around him panicked about what to do, he just calmly placed his finger over the open artery and called for a couple of candles and carried on with the operation as though nothing had happened. And I wonder really, without that battlefield experience, whether he would have been quite so calm or quite so capable.
Indeed, more formalised arrangements have been put in place to recognise the value that the reservists give and gain from the Territorial Army, and these will provide members with personal development records, which will detail their portfolio of skills and achievements. The reservist will also have increased opportunities to obtain NVQs and other accredited qualifications, all of which will further benefit the reservists and their employers in civilian life. But the most precious commodity the territorial soldier gives, and gives willingly, is his or her time.
I think that by joining the TA, people will find that it's quite a lot of commitment, but as with so many things, the more you put in, the more you get out of it. And people don't join the TA as they would join a sports club, for example. You go into uniform because you want to do your bit. And I think now the opportunities are there to do just that. And I certainly very much appreciated having the chance to go and serve, because I never got the chance to go on operations when I was a regular. So I've benefited enormously from that point of view. And I feel it's made my joining all the more worthwhile for having been able to do that.
But although much of their time is spent on the serious business of training, there are also numerous opportunities for fun and adventure.
Once you've got through your training and you know that you're a worthwhile soldier and you're an asset to your unit, then your troop, I think, can go off and go and do a sailing for a weekend. They can do arduous training, adventure training. It's serious fun.
So not only do the reservists share a common ethos with the regulars, they also share the same command structure and regimental system. The reservists may once have been somewhat of an unknown quantity to the regulars, but their new mission, which is to provide formed units and individuals as an essential part of the Army's order of battle for operations across all military tasks in order to ensure that the Army is capable of mounting and sustaining operations at nominated states of readiness and to provide the basis for regeneration, while at the same time maintaining links with the local community and society at large, has established the TA's role as a relevant, usable and integrated component of our armed forces.